What does it really cost to chase the world? Not just the money, not just the hours, but something far deeper. Something people don't see when they look at your life from the outside. Because chasing the world rarely looks dangerous on the surface. It often looks smart, ambitious, bold, even admirable. That's why so few people ever stop to count the cost. You work harder, you push forward, you build your image, you increase your income, you expand your influence, and people celebrate you for it. They call it success. But beneath the applause, something quiet starts to slip away. At first, you don't even notice. Your schedule gets heavier, your mind more crowded. The things that used to stir your heart now feel like background noise. You begin to pray less, not because you stopped believing, but because you stopped listening. You don't feel distant from God, just distracted. And distraction always feels safer than conviction. You tell yourself it's temporary, that the grind is necessary, that you'll slow down once you reach a certain point. But that point keeps moving, and so do you. Until one day you pause just long enough to ask a question no one else is asking. Why do I feel so empty? In Mark chapter 8, verse 36, Jesus asks, "What shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul?" That question still echoes because it still cuts deep. You can gain the whole world, titles, followers, wealth, access, admiration, and still lose the very part of you that was made to live forever. Not because you hated God, not because you were reckless, but because you were distracted, exhausted, constantly in motion. You kept chasing more without asking what it was costing you to keep up. The truth is, the world doesn't always take your soul by force. Sometimes it convinces you to hand it over piece by piece, through compromises, excuses, silent trade-offs. And one day you look around and realize the lights are bright, the rooms are full, but your spirit is hollow. That's the real cost of chasing the world, not failure, but success that slowly empties you of everything eternal. Nobody warns you how loud the silence can be when you finally get everything you wanted. You told yourself that once you reach this point, this job, this income, this recognition, you'd feel whole, that the pressure would ease, that you'd finally be able to breathe. But now you're here and something still feels missing. The applause fades fast. The success doesn't silence the noise in your mind. The numbers go up, but peace doesn't come with them. And maybe you don't talk about it out loud. Maybe it sounds ungrateful to say you feel empty when everyone else calls you accomplished. But God isn't confused by your success. He's not distracted by the image. He sees the soul underneath it all. The part of you that no stage, no salary, no spotlight can ever fill. You were never meant to be satisfied by what the world offers. Not because it's all evil, but because it's not eternal. It can't last. It can't carry the weight of your identity. It can't tell you who you are when the lights go out and you're left with your own thoughts in a quiet room. This is the trade no one talks about. You chase the world, you get what you chased, and in the process you start to forget who you were before the chasing began. You lose sensitivity, you lose simplicity, you lose dependence on God because somewhere along the way you started depending on outcomes instead. And the scary part is, it doesn't always feel like sin. Sometimes it feels like progress. Sometimes it looks like success. That's what makes it dangerous. You don't realize you're losing your soul because everything outside still looks impressive. But deep down, you feel the weight. You feel the distance between you and God growing. You remember what it was like to rest, to trust, to worship without wondering what's next. And now, it all feels mechanical, rushed, distant. Not because God moved, but because you started running in a direction He never asked you to follow. You didn't mean to drift this far. No one ever does. The road didn't start with rebellion. It started with ambition, with responsibility, with goals that even sounded godly at first. You wanted to provide, to build, to do something meaningful, and there's nothing wrong with that. But somewhere along the way, the mission replaced the master. The dream got louder than his voice. And now, if you're honest, you don't even know how to find your way back. Not because you hate God, but because you can't remember the last time you were truly still before Him. When was the last time you opened your Bible and didn't rush? When was the last time you prayed and didn't try to manage the outcome? When was the last time you just sat with God, not asking, not planning, just being? Somewhere along the chase, you stopped being a child at His feet and became a worker trying to earn a place in His house. And the truth is, you're exhausted, spiritually, emotionally, maybe even physically. But here's what the enemy doesn't want you to know. You can turn around. Right now. Right here. You don't need to fix everything first. You don't need to clean up or prove yourself or finish one more project before you slow down. God isn't waiting for you at the end of your grind. He's calling you from it. Because what good is all the gain if your soul is shrinking in the process? Mark chapter 8, verse 36 isn't a rebuke, it's an invitation. What shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? It's Jesus saying, you don't have to keep living like this. You can trade this pace for peace. You can trade pressure for presence. You can trade the weight of the world for the whisper of your Father. The world will never tell you when you've gone too far. But grace always does. And it always calls you home. Grace doesn't wait for you at the end of your success story. It meets you right in the middle of your mess. That's the part so many forget. You don't have to finish the climb to be loved. You don't have to achieve something sacred to be seen. The moment your soul turns back, God is already running toward you. He's not bitter about how far you drifted. He's not holding a list of things you should have done differently. He's not asking you to explain why you traded his voice for the noise. He's asking one thing: will you come home? Not to a place, not to a performance, but to a person. The Father who hasn't changed his posture, even if you've changed your direction. And maybe that's exactly what your soul been aching for. Not more achievement, not another goal, just rest, just presence, just the peace of knowing you don't have to chase everything anymore, because the one who matters most never moved. You don't need to abandon your dreams, but you do need to remember what your soul was made for. It wasn't made for constant pressure. It wasn't made for comparison. It wasn't made to find its worth in numbers, applause, or validation from people who don't even know the real you. It was made for the presence of God. And he hasn't stopped wanting you. In Luke chapter 15, Jesus tells the story of a son who chased the world and lost himself. He thought freedom meant distance from his father. He took the inheritance, ran far, spent fast, and ended up empty. But when he came to himself, when he finally realized how far he'd fallen, he turned back. And before he could even speak, the father ran to him, embraced him, and called him his son again. That's not just a parable. That's the heart of God toward you. He's not waiting for you to crawl back in shame. He's ready to cover you in mercy. And everything you've lost chasing the world can be restored when you return to him. When you return to the Father, you don't come back as a servant begging for a second chance. You come back as a child being restored to who you always were. That's the miracle of grace. It doesn't just forgive where you've been, it reclaims who you are. You're not defined by the years you spent running. You're not marked by how far you went or how fast you fell. You're defined by the one who never stopped calling you his. And when he brings you home, he doesn't give you a lower place at the table. He puts the robe back on your shoulders, the ring back on your hand, and the name back on your soul. Because you were never meant to live in spiritual poverty. You were made for sonship. And when you understand that, everything starts to change. You stop measuring your worth by your performance. You stop looking for approval in places that only leave you emptier. You stop trying to earn what's already been freely given. And for the first time in a long time, you can breathe. Not because life got easier, but because your soul stopped striving. You realize that success isn't wrong, but it's dangerous without surrender. Ambition isn't evil, but it must bow to the will of God. The world still calls for your attention, still tempts with more. But now you see it for what it is. It's temporary. It's loud but hollow. It can offer you a stage but never peace. And you were made for more than applause. You were made for presence. You were made to walk with the God who doesn't need your resume, but wants your heart. And the more you walk with him, the less you crave everything else. Not because you stopped caring, but because you started remembering what your soul was made for. And when you taste that kind of peace, you don't want to chase anything that threatens it again. Grace doesn't just bring you home. It gives you something to carry when you leave the doorstep again. Because being restored doesn't mean you sit still. It means you walk forward with a new posture, a new purpose, and a heart that remembers who it belongs to. God didn't pull you out of the world to isolate you. He rescued you so that through you, others would see what rescue looks like. Not through perfection, but through presence. Not through power, but through peace. The life you have now, after the chase, after the emptiness, after the turning back, it matters. Not because you have something to prove, but because you now know what's truly worth protecting. The world offered you its best and it still wasn't enough. That's not failure. That's clarity. And clarity is a gift. Now that you see what's real, your steps start to shift. You stop striving for validation. You stop performing for love. You stop chasing things that once seemed urgent because your soul has found something more steady: truth. And truth doesn't demand a platform. It simply asks for faithfulness. God is not asking you to burn your dreams, but He is inviting you to bring them under His voice, to let Him reshape what success looks like, to let Him guide what you chase next, because now you're not just moving, you're being led. You were not just spared, you were sent. Not sent to impress, not sent to compete, sent to shine, to speak life where there's weariness, to be light where there's too much noise, to walk slowly in a world obsessed with speed, and to prove, not with arguments but with how you live, that peace is possible when you know who you belong to. This is what grace produces, not just forgiveness but fruit. So when the world calls again, and it will, you'll recognize the sound. You'll remember the cost, and you'll choose what your soul was made for instead. Because now you've seen what chasing gives you, and you've seen what surrender restores. And the difference is everything. When God brings you back, He doesn't just restore what you lost, He gives you something new to carry, a deeper peace, a quieter strength, a voice that doesn't need volume to speak truth, and a presence that says more than your words ever could. People around you may not understand it. They might not notice the change right away, but they'll feel it. The way you show up differently, the way your ambition softens, the way your restlessness quiets, the way you no longer need to chase validation because you've finally found where you belong. You don't walk into rooms trying to prove anything anymore. You walk in already knowing who you are. And that kind of presence is powerful. Because in a world where everyone is exhausted from pretending, someone who's finally at peace becomes a rare and holy witness. You don't have to argue. You don't have to convince. You just live the way only someone rescued by grace can. You forgive faster. You speak slower. You notice pain in people who have learned to hide it. You ask different questions. You listen longer. And when the moment comes, you tell your story, not like a trophy, but like a testimony. You say, I've been there. I've chased what couldn't satisfy. I know what it feels like to win on the outside and feel lost on the inside. But I also know the one who brought me back. That's how redemption multiplies. Not in stadiums. In conversations. In small moments. In daily choices that say, I've seen the world and I've seen grace, and I choose grace. And when people ask you what changed, you won't need to list accomplishments. You'll point to peace. You'll talk about clarity, about how you stopped running from silence and finally met God inside it, how surrender didn't shrink you, it healed you. That's what the world really needs to see, not more polished people, but honest ones, not louder voices, but deeper roots, people who chased everything, found nothing, and came home whole. You've come a long way from chasing to breaking to returning, but the story doesn't end with coming home. It begins there, because once grace finds you, it doesn't leave you standing still. It calls you to move. Not in panic, not in pressure, but in quiet obedience to something deeper than you've ever known. Now that you've seen what the world can't give, you're ready to walk in what only God can. That doesn't mean you abandon your life. It means you live it differently, with intention, with awareness, with a peace that no longer depends on outcomes. You start noticing things you didn't before, the people who feel like you used to feel, the ones chasing something they can't name, the ones smiling but hollow inside. And you realize your story isn't just for you. It's meant to be light for someone else's darkness. You carry something now, not answers for everything, but a presence that says, I've been there and grace met me there. That's more powerful than you know, because in a world full of noise, someone who's found peace speaks louder than all the shouting. You may not feel ready, you may not feel qualified, but God isn't asking you to lead with strength. He's asking you to move with surrender, to offer what you have, even if it's not polished. Because what the world needs most isn't more perfection, it's more people willing to live healed. In 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 4, it says that God comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves have received. That's your calling now. Not to be impressive, but to be present. Not to fix everyone, but to walk beside them. Not to chase platforms, but to plant seeds. The cost of chasing the world is high, but the reward of returning to God is immeasurable. And now that you've tasted that reward, your life becomes a response, not a performance, but a living, breathing reminder of what grace can do. So walk forward, not like someone recovering from loss, but like someone entrusted with treasure. Because that's what your story has become. You know the truth now, and not just with your mind, but with your scars, your memories, your questions, and the ache that once followed you into quiet rooms after long days of performing, pretending, and pushing. You know what it feels like to chase the world with all you've got, only to realize it never truly wanted you, it just needed your effort, your energy, your soul. But now you've turned back, and in that turning you didn't find shame, you found a savior. One who didn't ask for explanations, one who didn't demand you fix everything before coming home. He opened his arms without hesitation. He welcomed you with joy, and he reminded you that even when you lost sight of him, he never once lost sight of you. That's what makes this story so powerful. Not that you hit rock bottom, but that grace reached even there. Not that you failed, but that he still wanted you. And not just to forgive you, but to walk with you forward as someone fully loved and truly restored. The cost of chasing the world was high. You felt it, in your weariness, in your fear, in the pressure that buried your joy, but the reward of returning was even greater, because you didn't just find peace, you remembered your name. And now your life can't stay the same. You walk different, not because you're perfect, but because you're rooted. You're not striving for approval anymore. You're moving from assurance. You're not speaking to be heard. You're speaking from a place of peace. And when the world starts calling again, because it will, you'll feel the pull, but you'll also hear a better voice. The voice that says, "You've already been found. Don't chase what I've already fulfilled." So walk forward, not as someone trying to prove anything, but as someone who has already been rescued, already been claimed, already been called. And if this message helped you breathe a little deeper, if it reminded you of who you are, if it gave you the peace you didn't even know you were craving, stay close. Subscribe not because this channel needs you, but because your soul needs reminders. And that's what this space is for people who have chased everything and finally found the only thing that matters. You're not alone, and you don't have to run anymore.